initiatives, challenge the status quo, and chair on the Audacity to act. All right. At Sterling, we believe that leadership is not just about position, it's about impact. And today, we gathered here not just as professionals, but as change makers, visionaries, fearless individuals ready to shape the future. This edition themed The Audacity to Do, a fearless generation, speaks directly to the spirit of our time, a generation that refuses to wait for permission to create change. And there's no better person to lead this conversation than our distinguished speaker, Zurel Odu, a true global change maker. And today, through an insightful fireside chat, we will explore what it truly means to be fearless in leadership, innovation, and advocacy. I encourage each of you to engage fully, ask intriguing questions, and take away lessons that will empower you to push boundaries in your own journey. Once again, welcome to the Sterling Leadership Series. Let's make this an evening of inspiration, courage, and action. Thank you. I'll expect that we'll ask as many questions as possible, so let's make it engaging. This fire chart will also, on this fire chart, side chart, we will be having Sheila Oj, a seasoned strategist, youth development advocate, and country manager for the African Management Institute, lead us on the conversation. So let's put our hands together as I welcome her on stage.
Good evening, everyone. I know it's 4:17, but I'm hoping that we'll be a little bit more alive today for the conversation that we're going to have, because I'm quite excited about today's edition of SLS, the Sterling Leadership Series. First of all, I would say a huge thank you to the Sterling team and to Sterling One Foundation, the foundation of foundations, for the invitation to host today's conversation. So while prepping for today, I watched one of our guests' TED Talks where she shared how her journey began on March 25th, 2013. At just 10 years old, she sat across presidents asking the kind of questions that a lot of us adults wouldn't dare to ask. And as I watched it, two words came to mind: the audacity. So audacity is not new to us in Nigeria. As a matter of fact, if you've been following the news lately, you might have heard of a certain female senator who is at the center of a major controversy in the Nigerian Senate. Or a certain institution that decided the best way to settle an unpaid bill wasn't to pay it, but to raid the service provider's office with full force, causing chaos and harming civilians in the process. The audacity. But that's not why we're here today. To be audacious in today's world means to take bold, decisive action despite uncertainty, resistance, or fear. It's about daring to challenge norms, disrupt the status quo, and push forward the conviction even when the odds seem stacked against us. In a time of rapid change, audacity is no longer optional for us. It is essential, whether in business, activism, leadership, or personal growth. Those who dare to take risks, speak up, and act decisively are the ones who are shaping the future. Audacity is refusing to wait for permission to create impact. It is women breaking barriers in male-dominated spaces. It is innovators who build solutions where there are obstacles. It is change makers who turn setbacks into opportunities It is young leaders demanding a seat at the table. Which makes our guest today, Zurel Odu, the perfect person to speak to us on this edition of SLS, The Audacity to Do, a Fearless Generation. Ms. Zurel Odu is a global change maker, education advocate, and the youngest ever Nobel Peace Prize nominee. She has sat face to face with over 30 world leaders, shaping policies on education and gender equality. She has inspired over 51,000 young people across 19 countries, proving that courage isn't just a concept, it is a catalyst for change. So, I think I'm ready for us to dive in. And so please join me in welcoming the phenomenal Zurel Odu. Please, a round of applause again. Just as Maurice mentioned earlier, this is a semi-formal interactive section, so which means that you are free to, if you have any questions, please, when we get to the Q&A section, please feel free to ask. Welcome, Zurel.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's truly, truly an honor. I remember when I was reading about you, I was like, oh wow, she's done so much that I have done without disclosing my age. So I think maybe start us on a journey, right? For anyone here who doesn't know, or maybe it's their first time meeting you, just tell us about your journey and how you've gotten to where you are today.
Yeah, of course. It's like, where do I start? Okay. Well, first, good afternoon, everyone. It's so good to see you all. I hope you all, feeling excited and a bit awake. I'm jet lagged. I have an excuse to not be awake right now. And so how I started, I do three simple things. The first thing that I do is I'm a filmmaker. I actually started as a filmmaker, which is the interesting part. So I was 9 years old, and back home in California, my school was part of a national competition. It was called National History Day. And they were asking students to create an essay, do a play, or create a documentary on a particular topic that they would give you. Now, being 9 years old, I was like, essay, let's put that on the back burner. To put together a play, I was one person, so I didn't think I could do that. So the other option was documentary filmmaking. And my family had like this really old 720p camera, like family camera we'd use to capture home videos and memories and things like that. So I thought, okay, maybe I could use this to create a documentary. So I created a documentary on the Ghana Revolution. That ended up being my topic because the year I entered, they asked us to create things on revolutions in history. So I went to Ghana to film some scenes. And when I was there, that's when I first noticed kids out of school, because it would be 10 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, normal school hours. And I saw a lot of kids, some my age, some a bit older, a bit younger, who were out on the streets. They were chasing cars, trying to sell things. And it's one thing when you're back home, you turn on the news, BBC, CNN, or you open a magazine and you hear about the issue of children being out of school. But it's another thing you can imagine as a 9-year-old girl seeing other kids like me and asking how comes they're not in school. So I found out it was a real problem. So I finished that education project. And then when the documentary project, I went back home and then I started brainstorming. I started thinking, what could I do to tangibly make a difference? Now, to wrap up the filmmaking side of things, started when I was 9. I've been doing that now. I'm 22 years old, so I've gotten a little bit older. So it's been 13 years, but whenever I make films, it's just to either tell untold stories. I feel like it's so important to shed light on those stories, to tell positive stories, because I'm sure if you turn on the news or open up a newspaper, there's so many negative stories out there right now. So it's nice to remind ourselves of some of the positive things. And the other thing I do, and this is my segue into education advocacy, is I use my films to highlight different challenges going on in the world. So as an education advocate, I can use my documentaries to highlight the issues of out-of-school children and out-of-school girls. So that was filmmaking, 9 years old. Year later, 10 years old, that's when I formally started my education project. It was called Dream Up, Speak Up, Stand Up. Sounds kind of cheesy and corny. Remember, I was 10 years old at the time. So that was my thinking. And the whole purpose was to speak to students who are in school about the importance of staying in school and getting a good education. So to date with this project, just students in school alone, I've spoken to over 51,700 students in 23 countries. So I've done this in places like Jamaica, Ghana, Ethiopia, Kenya, South Africa, and of course, also here in Nigeria. And then the other thing I do with my education advocacy, and this is the third thing, is I'm a presidential advisor. And so I sit down with heads of state, presidents and prime ministers to discuss serious policy issues, ones that revolve around youth development, gender development, but especially when it comes to education. And so to date, I've now met with over 36 presidents and prime ministers. I've met people like the Prime Minister of Grenada. I've met the Prime Minister of Fiji, President of Malta, President of Croatia, President of Egypt, President of South Sudan, President of Liberia, just naming a few of those ones, but all to discuss serious policy issues. So those are the three broad things that I do. And that essentially has been my journey from the age of 9 to now.
Thank you so much. Can we please give her a round of applause? That is truly, truly inspiring. So I'm listening to you saying all this, and what's at the back of my head is going, that's a fantastic childhood. Like, fantastic childhood. And so my first question would be, when relating with your parents, how was it when you, like, communicating with your parents to say, oh, I want to do this? What was their first reaction?
It's probably better to put them in this chair and you ask them that question. No, remember, my parents, so here's the thing they have to understand. Growing up, my parents always taught me and my younger siblings, I'm the oldest of 4 kids, by the way. They taught me and my younger siblings that if you see something and you think you can make a difference, then you should do everything you can to try and make that difference. Growing up, something else they also always did, my dad would always have me and my younger siblings watch the news. So like we'd watch global news, international news, and then he would say, okay, pick a problem that you saw in the news. And if you were president of that country, what would you do to solve that problem? And so like that was kind of like growing up our childhood. That's kind of shaped where I am today. And so when I originally talked to both my parents about this idea, first it started with the filmmaking, just trying to convince them that I wanted to go to Ghana to shoot a documentary. Can you imagine at 9 years old? Hi, Mom and Dad. I want to fly to Ghana to shoot a documentary. But no, they've been incredibly supportive. And I think it goes back to those two things they instilled in us from young, that if you were a leader, what would you do? And also that if you can make a difference, do the best you can. And so really I told them, Mom and Dad, like, these are the problems that I see. You always taught us this. I want to do something, or at least I want to try and do something about it. But they've been incredibly supportive. My mom, my dad, 3 of my younger siblings, because we're all older now, right? And so some of them travel with me on the various projects to help out with our film initiatives and things like that. So they've been incredibly supportive, incredibly amazing. Truly, I'm sure everyone can say this, but I truly feel very blessed to have them as a family.
It's great, great. So the theme for today is the audacity to do, fearless generation. What exactly does it mean to you, like having the audacity to do? What does it mean to you?
Having the audacity to do, I feel like, because I know this will definitely vary depending on who you ask. To me, I would have to say having the audacity to do means to dream. When I was 10 years old, I met with President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf of Liberia, and she said something very profound. She said, if your dreams don't scare you, then they're not big enough. Now, at the time I'd met her, I'd sat down with, I think, 8 or 9 heads of state. So you can imagine 10 years old, I was like, 8 or 9 presidents, I'm doing well. When she said that, I was like, no, I have to do even better. And so it's just truly, it's having big dreams. You know, one thing I always, whenever I speak to students in schools, I always tell them is it doesn't cost to have a dream. You can sit here, I can sit here, everyone who's sitting here, we can all sit here and we can dream. right? It doesn't cost us anything. And so I think having the audacity to do means dreaming big dreams, but also acting on those dreams. There's something that my mom actually sent the quote to me like 3 days ago, so it's perfect timing. And the quote was basically, time is the only currency we spend where we never know the balance. And so having the audacity to do is to have those dreams, but also to make sure we're acting on them. So we're using our time here on earth as best as we can.
Thank you so much. So still speaking on Audacity, and then just going back to what you were talking about earlier, and just in terms of what you've dedicated your time to do, you've dedicated quite a lot of your time filmmaking, and much of it's with advocacy, ensuring that girls have access to education.
Mhm.
From your experience and from your observation, what is the single biggest barrier that you see, especially in Africa, from girls not being in school or staying in school?
Mhm. Well, I wouldn't say there's one single. There's definitely a couple. I mean, you touched on both my filmmaking and my advocacy work and kind of how those come together, and I can use that to address this. Filmmaking really is just about storytelling. And storytelling is really a part of like effective communications, right? And effective communications, if you want to go down that path, is about one party sharing and another party receiving. And so when it comes to telling a story, I truly believe that a story has to have one ingredient. It has to be compelling. In other words, it's so strong and it's so convincing that it impels the recipient, you, to act. So here's an example. You talked about the biggest barriers that girls face when it comes to education. In 2018, when I was 16 years old, I found out that Mozambique, and some of you may know this, had one of the highest rates of child marriage according to UNESCO. And usually when they say child marriage, it's usually girl marriage. Girls as young as 14, 13, even 10 years old, being married to a guy who's 15, 20, or 30 years older than they are. It's usually about girls. And so I heard this. I went to his country because this was a major barrier to girls being allowed to go to school because they're taken out of school and sold off into marriages. So I sat down with the president, Felipe Nyusi, and the first thing that I did was I asked him very politely, very nicely. I said, do you know the work that I do? Running filmmaking workshops for unemployed young women and out of school kids, or the work that I do doing peace mediations, or just my generic global development work with other presidents and prime ministers and sometimes first ladies. And he said he did. No, he was aware of the work that I did. And then I asked him a very, very simple question. I asked him, wouldn't you want all the girls in Mozambique to be able to go to school and get an education so that they can do even greater things than what I'm doing? And he was quiet. He was very quiet, because how do you say no to a serious question like that? So that was the crux of our conversation. I went back home to Los Angeles and we continued talking. We continued communications through back channels. And 15 months later, after the help of a couple other voices, including the First Lady's office, Mozambique formally outlawed girl marriage. And so that... and so literally overnight, when that law was passed, it affected the lives of 1.1 million girls in the country. And the reason why I'm saying all this, because it answers your question of, one, what is a big problem that girls face? Unfortunately, it is girl marriages. But two, I feel like it's also important to talk about how to address those issues. I use this example to show, because that was a compelling story that impelled action. And so I share this because all of us here today, I'm one person, one voice, right? Everyone here has a role to play. And so I say this also to remind us that if we have to tell a story, if we must tell a story, it has to be compelling. So that way it can impel action.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I think we need to give her a round of applause again on that the great achievement. I would say in everything you've done so far, what would you say has been your greatest achievement, or would that be the greatest achievement so far?
I think to date, because that was a serious policy change, you can measure achievements any number of ways. For me, I think it's the impact, right? It's not about how many heads of state, how many students spoken to. It's about what's been the biggest impact. So I think that definitely would be, just because it's one of those things where when you hear about the issue of child marriage, and unfortunately it still goes on in other countries, right? So to be able to at least get it outlawed in one country, it's also not just to see as an achievement, but a reminder that a lot more work has to be done, but also that it's possible if you have the audacity to do it.
Okay. Now, still going back to that, I think for most young people, there is always that fear to speak up. I think also we, as Nigerians, we come from a culture where you're sort of, I think it's changing now, but I remember very much when I was a lot younger, you don't speak when adults are speaking, you are sort of restricted most times to be able to speak up and ask questions. There's always that, what do you know? Right? And the older you get, it sort of becomes in your subconscious where you start second guessing yourself. And so for a lot of kids who grew up here, or who grew up in typical, quote, and I use the word loosely, typical Nigerian homes, there's always that fear of, if I say something, they most likely will, shush me or something, right? I've also seen situations where, because once upon a time, I would be the youngest at work, right? And you would have these great ideas. And there is always that fear of, my boss is probably not going to listen to me, or no one is going to listen to me. But there was something profound in one of the um, conversations that I doing my research on just the work that you've done. And there was something you said about raising your hand and how that is something that you basically after your first experience, you started raising your hand and you haven't stopped ever since. How would you say that simple act of raising your hand has actually changed the way people have conversations with you, especially in rooms, possibly in rooms where most young people might not be heard or listened to?
That's a good question that I've never been asked before, actually. So that's a first. I've never sat down, been interviewed, and I've heard a question I've never been asked before. Um, no, raising your hand. I mean, you're right. It's raising your hand is almost like it's the mindset I've had to have. And you talked about like, when you're in rooms where young people, on sometimes even women as well, right? There's that intersectionality. I'm young, but also I'm a young woman. Yeah. And you also brought up something else about how society usually treats you, like how, whether it's here in Nigeria and other countries as well, not just here, right? And so and I may be wrong, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like we kind of have to start to change the conversation. The whole world has to change the conversation. And that is the conversation on how we youth should see ourselves, especially as we get ready to take over the leadership and management of our planet, because that's a major responsibility. In case you guys, that's a major responsibility for us. And I say that because we can't accomplish that with one arm tied behind our back. And by that, I mean, if only half the world is enabled and the other half is not enabled to thrive and to contribute 100% to our global development. So it's definitely twofold. There's the youth and also there's like the girls and women aspect. There's a story my mom told me a very long time ago. I know she was trying to teach us a lesson. I don't quite know what the lesson was, but I think I can use it here. There was this young girl who was like 6 or 7 years old, and she saw her mom cooking one day. Her mom was cooking dinner, and her mom usually makes this ham for dinner. And whenever the mom makes the ham, she would always cut off from both ends of the ham. And so one day, the daughter went up to her mom and she asked her, she said, "Mom, why do you cut the ends of the ham before you put it in the oven?" And her mom said, "Well, that's what my mom did." So a couple Sundays down the line, this young girl is hanging out with her grandma, and she asks her, she says, "Grandma, whenever mom cooks the ham, she always cuts off both sides before putting it into the oven. And she said she did it because you did it. So why did you do it?" And the grandma said, "Well, because my mom did that." And then it's a few months now at a family gathering, this young girl, she goes and she finds her great grandmother now. And she says, "When my mom cooks the ham, she cuts off both sides, but she said it was because her mom did it. But grandma said it was because you did it." So why did you cut off both sides of the ham before putting it into the oven? And the great grandmother said, well, back then they were really poor and they couldn't afford a lot. And the oven that they had was too small to fit a whole ham. And so they had to cut off a side from each, like one thing from each side to make it fit. And the mother and the grandmother were incredibly surprised to hear that that was the reason. But that was because they didn't know the history. They didn't understand the history. And so when you're talking about being in a room as a youth and as a young woman, there's a history that also has to change. I spoke about youth, but also this history of how men see women. We can't treat women certain ways just because that's how it's always been done. See, here's something that I've never seen before. Guess what that is? Lean in close, guys. Come close, close, close. Guess what that is? I have never seen a boy or a young man or an adult man hatch from an egg. Maybe you have. I've never seen that before. Nor have I seen one of them fall out of a shoebox. They all got to this earth one way, by a woman, their mothers. So if you just say, okay, 50% of this earth is women, then the other 50% were born by a woman. So how can we treat women differently? How can we treat them as lesser than men, right? When we treat women as lesser than men, we're literally fighting the world's biggest challenges with one arm tied behind our back. And we just can't do that. Going back to my example in Mozambique, and this is kind of like where the youth and the women like intersect and collide here. Went to Mozambique 2018, right? Had the conversation, simple conversation about ending child marriage. 15 months later, after almost a century of practice, the country outlawed child marriage. And so that just shows the example of what one voice, of what one girl, one youth, one person can do when they have the audacity to start a conversation that can change history.
Thank you. And it's really, really, you answered it perfectly. And I'm glad that you're also touching on women as well. Being young and being a woman, it's almost two things that you have to juggle between, right? I would say, so this year, International Women's Month or Day, the theme is accelerate. A few days ago, it's accelerate action. And over time, it has become, I'm actually very excited about the theme for this year because most times with conversations around women, it's usually just conversations. It's hardly about action. And seeing that you are someone that has been of action from a very young age, and you're still very young, what would you say to other young people out there, and then maybe to some of the older people as well? What are examples of things that they could do in terms of accelerating action, just the smallest of things?
Accelerating action. Okay. And this actually comes, okay, I can figure out how to answer this. This comes in perfectly because we just finished International Women's Day. And this is an example of something actionable that we can all do. I spoke a bit earlier about effective communications. I talked about storytelling, I talked about conversations, and then I talked about how men should change how they see women, right? Women also have a role to play. And by that, I mean, first and foremost, as women, we have to decide if we are objects or subjects. And by that, I mean, are we objects to be defined by others? Or are we subjects of excellence? Here's an example. I really don't think women got together and said, okay, let's dress a certain way, show off half our bodies in front of the cameras, wear shoes we otherwise wouldn't wear, just so a group of 4 or 5 people could tell us who the most beautiful is. Because then imagine, no, for real, how would they take us seriously if the very next day one of those same women now wants to talk about peace mediation or talk about a hostile takeover in a company or even just fundraising? Imagine raising $1 million for a venture. It's an oxymoron because sadly, but truthfully, in all honesty, people would still see the object from the day before as opposed to a subject of excellence. And so when you're talking about actionable steps, we as women have to begin to redefine what it means to be beautiful, starting first and foremost with what's in between our ears. And then if it has to be a criteria, has to be, then the very, very last thing should be what's in front of the mirror. Because as women, we don't want to be tokens, right? We don't want to be a token CEO, a token head of state. And so the prospects of millions of girls around the world hinges on this redefinition. If you look at Madame Christine Lagarde, for example, of the European Bank, Madame Ursula of the European Union, or who is it? The head of the WTO, Madame Ikondra Wele, right? If you look at any of those women, do you think they see themselves as objects or as subjects to define destinies? And so when you're talking about actionable steps, we have to begin to redefine what it means to be beautiful. When I say we, all women, so you and me on the stage, the women out here, anyone who may be watching, we have to begin that redefinition because it starts with us. And once you begin that redefinition, that's how you drive social change. That's how you modify norms. So that when we begin to step into the corporate world, we're stepping in from positions of strength and as subjects of excellence. So that's something I think you talk about excelling moving forward.
Yeah.
I think that's an actionable step that we should begin to do.
Yeah, thank you. And just going back to that, because you're talking about beauty, something that comes to mind is the media.
Okay.
And the role of the media in all of this. And also as a filmmaker, the media plays a huge role in how a lot of women see themselves today. Earlier on today, I was having a conversation how some women are struggling with aging because that's what the media shows them. It's almost like you're not allowed as a woman to get older. And so, in addition to that, you then see a lot of young women focusing on the optics of things. At the same time, the media is a very beautiful tool, right? Whether it's social media or traditional media, it's a beautiful tool. You are able to preach a message. You're able to spread information across different globes. Now, how, and in just your opinion or your thoughts, what exactly, and just from your experience as well with filmmaking, how can we continue to motivate young girls to take more leadership and changing things that truly matter, instead of just focusing mostly on things like beauty?
Well, there's a question I ask people sometimes, and that is, how can people believe what they don't see? So you talk about media. Media does have a very important role to play. As a filmmaker, whenever I'm teaching my filmmaking workshops to students, I always tell them that once you're a filmmaker, it's fun, yeah, you can tell stories, all that kind of stuff, but it's also a responsibility. It's a very serious responsibility. And so I definitely think it comes back to when I mentioned the how do people believe what they don't see? Whenever I sit down with heads of state, whenever I'm speaking to students in schools, whenever I'm speaking on any stage, any platform, as I'm speaking, I'm standing there as an example of what an educated girl can do. And so I truly believe that the more examples we put out there, the more stories we share that allow girls to see other girls, other young women, other women in positions of power and leadership, then they truly can see what's possible.
Thank you. I think I still have a lot of questions. However, I would like to open it up to the floor. If you have any questions, could you just please, or has everyone taken questions, or we don't have questions yet? Because I can keep going. Does anyone, you have a question? Fantastic. Could someone please help me with a microphone for the lady in the front? Someone helping? Anybody? Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So, good evening, all, and welcome to this session. And it's really, really inspiring. Thank you. My first question would be, how do you keep motivated? I know getting the results, as you know, the story you have shared with us is enough to keep you going. But in the midst of that, I'm wondering, have you had setbacks? And have you had criticisms, skepticism along the way? And how did you handle them? And what would you say to young girls who may also be facing similar situation? And from, again, the story you have shared with us, you started at such an early age, you actually went to your parents to say, I want to do this. So it was almost like no one inspired you to do it. Yes, indirectly, because you watch TVs and they said, think about what you would do in that situation. But who would you say, is a role model, or, who are your inspirations, if any, and how has that kept you going?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your question. So I'm going to answer those questions backwards. It was role model, criticisms, and then how I keep going, right? So the first one, role model, I literally just answered this question earlier today. Whenever anyone asks me who my role model is, I have to say my mom. So I said I'm the oldest of 4 kids. All of us were homeschooled growing up. So not only did she have her job, she also helped homeschool all 4 of us. And, she was always there as like the mom figure, I mean, she's always loved us so much and just raised us up. And when I say role model, as a girl, it was looking up to her as my mom. But now as a young woman, it's also looking at her as a woman to know things and like traits and like characteristics that I should be aspiring to show, I should be aspiring to be. So absolutely. It may be that cheesy answer, but I tell people it's the truth. It's the honest truth. My mom has been my biggest role model since the age of like however old I was to understand what a role model was. My mom has been my role model. Backwards now. Second question was about criticisms. I'll be completely honest with you. When it comes to criticisms, I ignore them. Only because when you allow criticisms in, then that's when they can become distractions. I first figured that out when I was like first started off. Met a couple of heads of state, couple of world leaders, and people were saying, oh, well, she got to meet one president or 2 presidents because her parents are connected. And that wasn't the case. And so I literally looked at that and thought, okay, criticisms will just get in the way. So I completely ignore them. There's constructive feedback. It's always good to learn from what we do. Always good to learn from our mistakes. But then criticisms, I just completely ignore them. And then the last thing you asked is how to keep motivated more than just success stories. Again, I'm going to be if you allow me to be completely honest with you all, it's the grace of God. Absolutely, first and foremost, it's the grace of God. And then my family has been incredibly supportive. Like, yeah, there can be times when you feel tired, when you're like, oh, like this is tiring. And they remind me, like, you have a purpose. And they remind me of why I first started what I'm doing. It's almost be like, if you're on the road and you're driving, I'm sure everyone drives here, right? I'm like, yeah, everyone drives here. Or at least is driven around. You're driven around, right? There you go. If you're driving and you see signs, right? Imagine you're driving to Abuja. You see like Abuja, 400 kilometers, right? You keep driving, then you see Abuja, 350 kilometers, and then Abuja, 300 kilometers, and then just no more signs, right? You have to have faith that those first 3 signs mean you're on the right track. Because there's a lot of people who after the 3rd sign will turn around, not knowing that they were on the right track, and they'll just go back the way they came. So it's once you've seen those first couple of signs, again, by the grace of God, then you know that you're on the right track. So I hope those answered all 3 of those questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, sorry, sir. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Well, Zurel, thank you very much. So I'll just piggyback on the last question you asked. Usually I use 20-year markers, and you started so early. Your first 20 years is almost done. Most people have a 20-year view, if at all. What's your next 20-year view?
This is going to be another one of those honest answers for you all. I feel like we can all be honest here. I honestly don't know. You talked about living lives in 20 years, maybe not 20 years ago, but like 10 years ago, if you asked me, where would you be 10 years from now? I probably couldn't even remotely be close to telling you all the things that I've done today, all by the grace of God. It's that thing where, like, as I'm sitting here right now, I have no idea who's behind me. Clearly there's no one behind me, I hope, because this is the thing. But like, I can't see who's behind me, right? Just like everyone in the audience today, you can't see the person behind you. So it's incredibly hard for me to even say what tomorrow looks like, what a week from now looks like, let alone 10 years from now. And so when it comes to things like that, in all honesty, I have to go to the one person who knows everything and sees everything. And that's how I figure out where this is going.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much for your question.
So my question, first of all, let me just commend you. Great audacity to do, audacity to dare, audacity to just be out there and be who you are. So well done to you, and of course to your supportive family and siblings. Incredible. And that leads me to my question. What advice do you share with people who don't have that? They don't have support. They're, you know the population in Nigeria. About 60, maybe 65% are young people. And I have 3 kids and they're all in the creatives industry, and I love it because my own father said, you want to do what? You better go and do a proper job and make some money. So that was then, right? Because they didn't know any better. If my dad was alive now, God rest his soul, he would have said, oh my goodness, I should have encouraged you. But hey, my kids are now in that field. And again, as a supportive parent, I'm supportive of them. And if I wasn't, where would they be? So how do you encourage people who don't have parents, people who have a dream and have that audacious dream, that big, hairy, scary dream, but no one to help them? What would you say to a young Zuera? Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I never said hairy. I said scary. Hairy is a whole nother matter. But no, first, thank you for even supporting your kids and allowing them to do something, what they enjoy doing. I think, and I've been asked this question quite a few times. I always credit my family as being my biggest support. In complete honesty, support can come from anywhere. And so whenever I speak to youth, whenever I speak to students or whoever it may be, the biggest thing is first, it is that dream, to make sure you know where you want to go first, to make sure you understand what your dream is, how big your dream is, and eventually how that can be used to change the world. And the other thing that I tell them is that, again, I'm going to use that word a lot, again, being honest here, there are a lot of people in this world who will tell us reasons why we can't do something. They'll say you can't do it because you're this young, you're a girl, you have no family. They'll give you all kinds of reasons why you shouldn't do something. As an individual person with our own dreams, we have to make sure that we don't add on top of that. There's a long line of people in the world who say they don't believe in you. We have to make sure that we, if need be, we start our own line of people who do believe in us. And like I mentioned, support, it isn't just families, it's communities, it's neighborhoods, it's the teachers, it's school districts, it's family is not just one thing. Family can mean a lot of things. And so it's finding support wherever you can and a lot of prayer. Even with support of us, it's a lot of prayer. So that's definitely what I would say. Thank you so much for your question.
Thank you so much for the questions. So far, I'm glad that I have taken 4 questions off my list. So thank you so much. Yes, another question.
Okay, thank you so much for the program so far, and well done, Zurel. You've done fantastically well. Like, I dare say you've done a lot. You have the audacity. But then my question is, so we've heard a lot of success stories. What happens when you have a good cause and you've chased it, you've done all you know how to do best, but you're not getting positive responses to them? Like, it seems like everybody's going blank on you. And this is good. Like, everybody knows this is for the betterment of girls, of women, of even the whole community, but you just seem to be getting a blank response. How do you handle it personally? And then how do you deal with it, knowing that you have to keep going because you have a lot more to do?
Thank you very much for your question. You kind of answered part of it for me by saying that you have to keep going. I know you mentioned that you've heard a lot of success stories. These are the success stories. There have also been many other trials and attempts at trying to accomplish the same things. So I mentioned the Mozambique example where it ended child marriage, right? I was 16. A few years prior, I was 10 years old, and I went to meet President Salva Kiir Mayardit of South Sudan, because at the time, I also found out that his country had a very, very high rate of girl marriage. Now, 10 years old, I was ready to take on the world. I said, okay, I'm going to have this meeting, and I want to be able to end girl marriage with this meeting. So I went to go and meet with him. We sat down, we spoke at length. but I didn't quite get the answer that I wanted. So I went back to the drawing board. And then a few years later, that's when now we see the Mozambique success story. So it really is to keep going. Because if then I was like, well, this meeting didn't work, this is too hard, no one's ever going to understand what I'm trying to say, then we wouldn't have had outlawed grow marriage in Mozambique, those success stories. So truly it is to keep going. It's not, I'm not saying it's easy. There are many other stories like that South Sudan one, but it's to remind you that with each of those things, there is success down the path. I think it was Nelson Mandela, famous quote of his where he says, I never lose. I either win or I learn. So the wins are those success stories. And for the times that we don't quite see the outcome we want, we learn from that. We go back to the drawing board until eventually we see the success. Thank you very much for your
Thank
question.
you. And then just following through with that question. So we now live in a world that is digital first. And permits me to tell a little story because I'm still kind of trying to figure out what to do with this. But I have an 8-year-old. She's going to be 9 this year. Yeah, I know. And there is this creative writing competition that she's so excited about. And, you know, I do my best as a supportive parent because I also do some writing. And so she emailed me because, you know, now we use laptops in school and everything. And so she emailed me this essay that's 1,000 words that she said she was going to turn in. And so I started reading it and I was like, this sounds a bit, I mean, I know my child is smart, I'm smart, but yeah, when I start seeing sections on digital economy and job creation in Nigeria, there is something wrong somewhere. And so I then said, because her name's Alyssa, I'm like, Alyssa, what's going on? I'm like, okay, so who is Paystack and who's Piggyverse? This is some of the, you know, the tech giants in Nigeria. And she couldn't answer. And I'm like, so what happened? She was like, oh, I was having writer's block. So I used Copilot, which is AI, the artificial intelligence, to write the essay. At one point, a bit of me was like, oh, wow, okay, she can use AI. Okay, that's good. The other part of me was quite terrified because if an 8-year-old is now knowing how to use AI, where do we go from here? I bring this up because we're in a digital era. However, a lot of people, and when we look at our political and economic systems, those in power remain sort of analog. They haven't caught up. And if an 8-year-old is already using Copilot or using artificial intelligence to be able to write an essay, which, by the way, I did a whole don't do this anymore, you end up in jail if you continue doing this speech, because I am a Nigerian mother at the end of the day. So, and I showed her pictures of Kiri Kiri, that's like maximum prison, just by the way. Yeah, just so she doesn't do it again. Now, just going back to that question, how exactly do we then accelerate change when the people in power don't exactly speak our language? And I'm asking you that question because you've had conversations with over 36 presidents and prime ministers, and some of them don't speak the language of young people or this digital language. How are we able to sort of accelerate that change and convince them? Because you can't be everywhere in the world, right? At the same time. What can young people, or what can people do in general to be able to say, hey, maybe you can see things our way and accelerate the change that we need for young people as well as for women?
Absolutely. I think this goes back to a bit of what I was talking about earlier with storytelling. Whenever I sit down with the different heads of state, and this is where the grace of God comes in, if you can imagine 36 plus different heads of state, that's 36 plus different conversations, different speaking points, different talking points. Like, how am I going to do this, right? And so it truly is about storytelling and figuring out at the end of the day, what is a commonality? What's a common goal? You can sit here and say, we need AI and this and this and that. And I'm not an AI professional whatsoever. I studied it a bit in undergrad, so I'm not here speaking as like the head of it. There's better people to answer those questions for you. But it truly is about telling the stories and figuring out what we all want at the end of the day. And when you talk about your daughter, like in the digital age, it's true. Like it's completely different how people may have grown up a decade ago, 2 decades ago to how we're growing up now. There's technology everywhere. It's in our schools, in our homes. And so it's also kind of, in a way, it's that this new generation is going to have new tools to use when eventually they grow up to become leaders of the planet, leaders of the world. And so it's just one, it's like that first thing about storytelling, but then also is cultivating and encouraging our youth and cultivating kind of an environment and an atmosphere where we encourage our youth to use the resources at their disposal. And so that way, as they grow up to become leaders, they take that with them into a new generation of however leading may look in the next 20, 30 years of all this technology.
Thank you so much. I don't know if we have it. Okay, yes, we have another question.
Hello. Yeah. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, as well, I must say you're a phenomenal. You're a, what I call you a wonder of the world, because I'm imagining my 9 years old self talking to president. Trust me, my mom and dad will tell me, go and read your book. What do you know? So how have you been able to, as a child, been able to champion this? Trust me, you are challenging me. Looking at you from this distance, I'm like, wow, you're doing a lot. And also, another question is, how have you been connected to Africa? You live in America, I guess, and you're doing a lot in Africa. How have you been able to stay connected over the years? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. So I'm going to ask you to just repeat the first question because that one wasn't quite clear to me.
Okay. Okay, my first question.
Yeah.
Funny though, but I was like, how were you able to champion this as a 9 years old child?
Okay.
Yeah, so is it because you're in America? Because in Nigeria, trust me, no matter how smart, brilliant, intelligent you are, your parents will never, I'm talking from experience, no matter how smart you are, trust me, I would say I'm smart, but I never had this opportunity. Trust me, advocate for people. Rather, go and read your books, come first, get a good job like our mama spoke the other time, like, hey, go. But today I'm in the creative, I'm an interior designer, different from what I studied in school. I studied electrical electronics engineering from University of Benin, but today I'm an interior designer. I took that decision myself, not because my parents wanted me to work in NNPC, Shell, or Chevron, by the way. So how were you able to, as a 9-year-old child, build this? You are 22 and you're still doing this and you're doing very great. So how were you able to do all this? Is it because you're in America? Because in Nigeria, possible?
No, it's location. No. No, it's not location at all. I talked about it earlier. It was about dreams, drive, and passion. Because here's why. In all the work that I've done, I mentioned I've been to 23 plus countries now, right? I've had the opportunity to meet with over 51,000 youth. And for each of them that I've met, I hear their stories, I hear their dreams. And it's not about location. It truly is about those dreams and drive and that passion. One of the things that I do, I started off as a filmmaker, I mentioned. And so with my foundation, the Advocacy Foundation, we also now teach basic filmmaking workshops to youth. And so I ran my first workshop when I was 13 years old in Namibia. This is back in 2016, had about 25 youth come out. We had a great time, taught them about audio, voiceovers, lighting, things like that. And then 9 months after that first film workshop, one of the young ladies who attended, she went out, she borrowed a camera, she borrowed some money, and she made her first feature-length documentary, which she got to shop around to TV networks in her area. So that was Namibia, that wasn't the US. And so everywhere I go, there's at least one student like that who has a story like that. So it's first question, I say it's not about location. It truly is about the drive, the dream, and the passion. And then the second question that you asked me, if you can remind me one more time, because I was enjoying your story. It was really funny. You can remind me what your second question was, please.
Yeah. So how do you stay connected to the lives you impact in Africa, even though you're based in America? Yeah.
How do I stay connected? So a lot of my work has been done on the African continent. There was definitely a part of my work a few years ago where during my travels, I was easily spending 4 or 5 months on the African continent just for my education projects alone. So I do come here a lot. When it comes to the students, sometimes we have follow-ups. So that one example I gave about Namibia on the film workshop, we actually went back to Namibia to meet up with the girl, meet up with the film class to congratulate her and just kind of see where they're in, check in with them. And so I do, to the best of my ability, whenever possible, try and come back to meet with students. There's a couple of schools that I've done multiple visits to just to see how the students are doing, to see where they are now, to see if to talk about dreams, to talk about education, to see what's actually had an impact on their lives. So even though I'm based in the US, most of my work is overseas, here in the African continent, in the Caribbean, a bit of work in Europe, and more recently in the Middle East. So the travels, the constant travels do allow me to stay connected to those that I'm working with through my projects. Thank you for both your questions and for the funny story. I do appreciate that.
Okay, please go ahead.
Yeah. So I really want to commend you for everything you're doing. Like,
Thank you.
I've been so inspired and challenged. So thank you so much. So I have two questions. So the first question is, what has been your greatest setback so far, and how were you able to convert it to an opportunity? And the second question is, well, in Nigeria, our educational system, I think up until now, because I still look at my younger ones, all the things that are being taught in school. You will mention that when you were in school, so you had three options, either an essay or filmmaking and all of that. But we don't really have that. So we're just talking quantitative and verbal and all of that. So the question I want to ask is, so if you are to redesign the educational system of Nigeria, what are the major three things that you all really work on?
Another thing off my list. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the first question, that one's like a quick and easy one. When you talk about what was the greatest setback and how did I learn from it, how I moved on from it, it would have to be the South Sudan example, where I met with the head of state, didn't get the answer I wanted, went back and I figured out, actually I learned a very important lesson. There's not one way to do the exact same thing or in different countries, right? South Sudan, it didn't work out the way I wanted to, but by taking what I learned from that setback and going back to the drawing board, we were able to create a success story in Mozambique. And the second question you asked, so just to clarify real quickly, the essay, the documentary, and the art project, that was part of a competition that the US was running. So the History Channel back in the US was running the competition and schools chose to compete in that. Because trust me, I would also love to have a class in filmmaking in my school. I didn't have that either. But when you're talking about the education system, something that I've started to speak about, I would say over the last couple of years, is this idea of alternative education. And so if you think every single year UNESCO puts out big numbers, right? 170 million out of school children, 180, 200 million out of school children, and we're not really seeing a lot of change in those numbers. So a couple years ago, I thought, well, what if we change the metrics with which we measure a child's cognitive development? And by that, I mean, instead of saying X amount of out of school children, what if we focus on just on children who are uneducated? Because there's a difference. Because in different parts of the world, here in the African continent and other parts, there's communities where there's no physical school building. In other communities, schools are like 10 miles in any direction one way, right? So how can we ask kids to go to what doesn't exist or what's hard to access in their own communities? So this idea of alternative education is that schooling and education is not just what you learn in the classroom. So it's not just math, it's not just history or science or whatever it may be, but there's also other things that contribute to a person's education. So I mentioned the film workshops as one example. Those film workshops are teaching a tangible skill that these youth can use to hopefully get employed, support themselves, support their families, but also it's a platform they can use to amplify their voices and to tell their stories. But filmmaking is just one skill. There's many other skills that aren't taught in traditional schooling systems. There's coding, there's AI, there's entrepreneurship, there's different things that we can be teaching. And so I think the biggest thing is just to shift our focus from just what a traditional schooling system looks like to also incorporate areas of alternative education so that also we're reaching the students who may not even have access to what a traditional school system looks like. So I think that's probably how to answer that question. Thank you very much, though.
Thank you. Sir.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah. Good evening.
Good evening.
Zurel, I had a very rare opportunity. If you recall, I met you about 15 years ago, and I am quite impressed by Lagos Lawn Tennis Club. I'm sure your dad will be able to know exactly how many years that should be about 15 years ago. And I am quite impressed about your progression. I never saw this in you. Can you tell us who is Zurel Odu? That's one. The other one is that you are a Nigerian. You are a huge a brand to us as a Nigerian. To what level do you see a connection? Do you see the kind of expectations as a big brand for us as a Nigerian that you are getting? Connecting with Nigerians, government, or are your expectations from Nigeria? You have mentioned South Sudan more than 3 times now. You mentioned Mozambique, I was listening. I am a core Nigerian. I have lived all my life working for this 52 years in sports, and we have not even reached this to scratch, unfortunately. I want to see more. Do you have drawbacks? Do you feel you could do more? You are not getting what are those challenges that you wish? Then who in Nigeria? Then who is Zurel Odu?
Thank you very much for those 2 questions. No, very interesting questions. I'm trying to figure out which one is easier to answer first. I guess we can start with who's Zurel Odu. I was hoping I kind of answered that question in the last 30 minutes we've been together. But no, I'm honestly, if you were to ask me who Zurel Odu is, my answer, like I've answered your questions about this work, this one. Honestly, I'm a regular girl. Like if you ask anyone who knows me, anyone who knows my family, my siblings, I'm a complete regular girl. Like back home, I play soccer, play basketball, hang out with my friends, we go to the movies. We have like competitive game nights, not just with my friends, with my family. They say I'm competitive. I do not think so. But I guess being the oldest of like 4 siblings, that competitiveness just kind of sometimes, yeah, you all don't see it right now. Apparently they see it when we play games together. So no, Zurel, I'm a regular girl. First and foremost, I'm a child of God. Then next to that, I'm just a regular girl. And the other question, I think I know. I want to make sure I understood the question properly. Essentially, it's you're asking about if more needs to be done in Nigeria and like who and like the stakeholders is that, and how. Well, listen, I'm one person. I'm one voice sitting here today. I'm hoping the biggest thing that I've shared with you all, or that you all can get from this, is that each of us here has a voice. Each of us has something that we can be doing. And so when it comes to Nigeria or any other country, I know you want to focus just on Nigeria, but with any country, honestly, there's always work to be done. Whether it's with education, whether it's with gender development. And the biggest things as one person, you ask, could I be doing more? Honestly, I push myself. I always think that I can be doing more in any endeavor that I'm doing. I always think I could be doing more. And then on the back end of that, it's also that everyone here has a role to play. And collectively, when you start to bring together change makers, start to raise up a generation of change makers. Because I truly believe these next up and coming generations are gonna just like transform this world in a way that we've never seen. I say I'm part of that generation, but I think we're gonna transform this world in a way that we've never seen before, and maybe that we never even thought possible. And so I don't know if that's quite the answer you're looking for, but that's probably how to answer that question.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Zur. This is going to be a very short question. I've observed that you spend most of your life talking to people in government, talking to people in power, because that's probably the strongest lever to do something about our problems. But there are also thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of leaders in the private sector who, to my mind, control as much resources, sometimes even more resources than those in government. Is there a part of your storytelling or a part of your engagement where you want to start to talk to people in private sector? And if you were going to talk to us, what would be your line? What would be the one thing in their story that will compel us to action?
Very good question. So I've spoken to people in the private sector before. When I have been, it's to talk about the importance of partnerships. You know, there's that old saying: if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go. Okay, so let's try that one more time. Y'all supposed to join in with me there. If you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go. I feel like we can do a bit better. One more time, everyone with me. Okay. If you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go. Look at that elaboration. See, we grew each time. Okay. No, but it's true. Whenever I speak with the private sector, first of all, and I'm sure if you know this coming from corporate, there's CSRs and there's ESGs. It's not just citizens who have responsibility. It's not just governments who have responsibility, but private firms, private companies, private sectors also has a responsibility. And so in the past, and this is why I would say now, is through the various work that I've done, it's been about building partnerships. See, people forget I'm still a student. My budget is a student's budget. So all of this work and travels that I do has been because of a lot of partnerships with private sector, whether it's airlines, hotels, companies on the ground to provide rooms for filmmaking workshops, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think the biggest thing is partnerships. The biggest thing is you have a role to play, but it's also what we can do together. I wouldn't sit there and say, okay, you in private sector, go and do this. You have a responsibility. It's the teamwork. It's the collaboration, it's the partnership, because together, that's how we can go far. Thank you very much for your question.
Yes, please.
Hi, Zurel. Good evening. It's been
Hi.
refreshing listening to you. So, I just wanted to ask about what can you say your parents did differently? I mean, in this generation, we have a lot of parents who want to give their kids the freedom to choose their career path and give them all the support and confidence that they need. I really would like to be like your parents anyway. So what would you say they did differently, and how were they able to balance supporting you and also making sure that you are safe from the influences of what that freedom can do?
That is a really good question. I feel like that's definitely a question for my parents.
Yes.
Only because they could answer it better. I could only guess what they were thinking. There's something though that my dad's always said, and when he talks to other people who ask him the same thing, parenting advice, he says it's important to let your kids dream, to let them understand that things are possible, but it's also to guide and guard them. So it's not to block them. If you imagine, so if you're going down this path, for example, right? Something here, that's blocking. Something here is guiding and it's guarding. And so I truly believe they gave us the freedom, they gave us responsibility. I mean, they told us if you want adult privileges, you're going to also have adult responsibilities. Yeah. And so they kind of raised us up with that mindset. But I believe that they did a good job. It was guiding and guarding us to make sure that with those freedoms, with those responsibilities, we didn't go either way. Right? Give you the same thing. I go back to driving a car. I know it's better to say if you're being driven in a car and you're driving down a road, right? And there's like a cliff on either side. They always have rails up to make sure the car doesn't go over. Mm-hmm. And so that was basically it. If me and my siblings, if we were the car, our parents were the guide rails. So we had the freedom to go as far as we wanted, as fast as we wanted, but they were there to support us to make sure that we stayed on track. And then again, biggest thing, they prayed for us. Oh, if you talk to them, they prayed for us. Morning, noon, night, evening. They prayed for us all times of the day. So I think that's it. It was the prayer and also just guiding us and guarding us on our journeys.
I just want to add that Zuriel's father is actually here with us. So I'm hoping maybe for those of us that are very interested in how to support our children, maybe he could have a masterclass for us. Not today, any other day. We'll have a masterclass. Have him come
back here.
Yeah, we'll have him come back and he can answer all those questions. But just want to say good evening, sir. Thank you so much for. Okay. Do we have any other questions? Oh, we do have a lot of questions. Okay. Yes, the young man in the purple. I don't know who has the microphone. Oh, who? Oh, you have the mic. Okay, all right. No, I think it should be on now. There we go.
Okay, yeah, all right. Okay, hi, Zurel. So I thought twice. I'd raised my hands a few times and I put it down. I have twin daughters who are about your age mate, and sometime, I don't know if it was a 15-year ago or 10 years ago, that you were back here and there was some filming thing that I brought them for. Fast track now, one of them, year 3 in medicine, decided she wasn't going to do medicine again. And she's now in the creative. It took a lot of resetting for me as a parent, to accept that.
Fellow creatives, we apologize.
But one of the things that struck me is that there are lots of people who see you as a role model. Your age mates, younger people, how are you able, what are you going to do to replicate yourself? Because there's just so much you as Zurel can do. I see you as a beacon for young people in terms of advocacy, leadership, entrepreneurship, and how are you able to connect all those people so that their story in the next 10 years can be heard? How can you start a movement, and how can you showcase the success stories from those who have gone through your total age, if you allow me to say that, in the next 10 years? Zurel, you're 22 now. In another 20 years, will you be still, I mean, so going back to what Tonya said, in 20 years, are you still going to be doing this? You probably would have kids. There's so many things that would, take your attention then, and you might not be able to do this. So how are you going to pass on that baton? That's the question I'm asking. Thank you.
So that question, I guess, sorry to go back to Mr. Tonico, I guess also to answer that question as well, is you asked if I still plan on doing this 20 years from now. In this exact moment, no, my answer is yes. If you ask where I'd be 20 years from now, I have no idea. But if you ask me sitting here today, do I plan on continuing this work? Absolutely. Just because there's still so much that has to be done. And then the other part of your question, when you talk about how do you create, I won't say more zeros, but how do you create or inspire other youth to do similar things, to use their voices, right? And there's this thing I always talk about. My dad first spoke about it to us when we were young. I think you're going to find a common trend. My parents gave us a lot of advice growing up. And it's like, that's what I'm going to be spitting back out to you guys. But my dad always told me and my younger siblings, especially the girls, me and my two younger sisters, that excellence transcends. In other words, if you excel at something, no matter what you look like, how old, how young, whatever it is, they will come and find you. There's this movie, I like to be interactive. By show of hands, how many of you have seen the movie Hidden Figures before? Okay, quite a few of you, right? So basically, it was the story about the US sending the first man up into space. But really, it was about the 3 African American women who were behind him doing the mathematical equations and all of that, right? Now, this happened during a time where there was still segregation in the US, right? But despite that, these 3 African American women, because of how good they were at their jobs, because they excelled at their jobs, NASA, a major organization, came to them to do the calculations to send the first man up into space. And so when I talk about excelling, it's true. If you excel at what you're good at, first and foremost, you have to find what you're good at, find what you enjoy doing. Then you have to make it your own. And then after you've made it your own, you have to excel at it. If we think over the last 10 years, if I were to ask you guys, if you watched track and field in the Olympics, over the 10 years ago, who did everyone think was going to win? Okay, guy, you got to know. I love interaction. So 10 years ago, watching the Olympics, if someone were to ask you who's going to win 100 meters, 200 meters, who would everyone say? See, we all knew the answer. Okay, Usain Bolt, right? Which means that really every time we watch those races, it was a race for second and third, right? Because everyone thought he was going to win because he excelled. So if someone calls him now to come talk about racing, come talk about track and field, no one's going to look at him and say, oh, we can't take you seriously. What do you know? Because he excelled at his craft. And so when it comes to my generation, generations after me, it's to find something you're good at, find something you enjoy doing, something you're passionate about, make it your own, and then push yourself to excel at it, because then people will listen, then people will come and find you. Thank you for your question.
Hello. Good evening, Zoya.
Evening.
Okay, so I have 3 questions.
Okay.
But I'm going to start with this, so I go into the question. So 2019, I did my GC as an external candidate, and I was the only one in my center to sit for music because I had wanted to study music. So it was a concern for me because English, there were so many people, maths, every other subject. Then music, just me. And I'm looking, is it just me? Yeah, they say it's just you. So you just have to hurry up and, let us go. Then immediately after that, I graduated from the Musical Society of Nigeria last year. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yes, thank you. So I told some of my friends, I said, look, this is a major challenge in Nigeria because when I looked at the curriculum from GS1 to GS3, you have what called culture and creative arts. They mix music, drama, and then dance together. When you go to the senior section now, SS1 to 3, there's either no music at all. Although there's music, but there are no really music teachers teach, and there's, especially in the public settings. So I told them, I said, look, this is a major challenge and we should take up this challenge. Let's see how we can set up a foundation, start teaching children music. And then we are trying to see how we can break, culture and creative arts, not just culture and creative arts, to break it into main sections. If it's dance, let it be dance. If it's music, because mixing it, they don't really get enough. Then by the time they move to senior school, they don't do it at all. So you can imagine. So we started the foundation, the Dark Horse Music Foundation, and we're going about public schools teaching them music. Although we have our challenges and then our setbacks, but this is the first question. How do you really go about the conversation like this to make a change in a sector where you don't have a seat there? Because we are trying to change how the curriculum looks like. We are trying to move away music to stand on its own. And then secondly, how do you go about fundings? Because this is a very major challenge. Music really needs a lot of funding. You have to buy the instruments, you want to teach them. I remember some 3-4 weeks ago, we went to a particular school and the students barely had seats to sit on. So they were all on the floor and they were so excited, the creatives to really learn about music. And then there was no board. So someone had to donate marker board for us. So how do you really go about the funding? The first question, how do you go about, conversation in change in a sector where you don't have a seat at? Secondly, how do you go about the funding? And then thirdly, how do you really convince them that this ought to be a break? And they ought to be teachers for this. That is music. It doesn't have to be together. There has to be a break apart. And then there has to be teachers in all of this. Thank you.
So I'll tie in your first and third question because they're pretty similar. I know you asked specifics about music and stuff like that. That's not my area of expertise, so I couldn't answer to that. But when you talk about how to have a conversation in a field where you don't have a seat at the table is how you phrased it, right? Listen, when I started 10 years old, there was no 10, 12, 14, 16-year-old at any table when it came to policies, at any table when it came to decision making at the policy level. And so when you're asking how to have those conversations, there is no one size fits all. So I can't sit here and say, okay, if you say these exact words, they will let you in at the table. Because I can't promise that. And that's a lot of times, unfortunately, it's not how it works. But it's to keep doing what you're doing with your foundation, because that's how you build the track record. You start off small. You start in one school. I'm sure you've grown to a couple schools now, right? You start small, you grow that. You build a track record. You build a reputation, and then you use that because you've excelled at that. You use that as a platform to build credibility and trust as to why people should listen to you in your area of expertise. So the question I answered a bit ago is like, you found what you're passionate about. You found something you're good at, right? Now it's just to excel at it and push yourself at it. So that way they listen to you. And then the other question that you asked was about fundraising, right? Isn't that always the question foundations always talk about, fundraising? Well, so I'll tell you about our foundation. There's two different kinds of fundraising. There's monetary fundraising, like actual money to buy supplies, and then there's resources. So for example, you talked about needing instruments, right? Maybe it's not to get money for instruments, maybe it's to find an instrument manufacturer who will donate like a drum set to you, or donate 2 trumpets to you, or something like that, right? So there's different ways to go about it. And honestly, a lot of that will come down to the private sector. So talking to private sectors, because a lot of private companies have their CSR and they have their ESG. CSR is corporate social responsibility, and then ESG I think is environmental sustainable governance. Governance, yes. Sorry, I'm jet lagged. Okay, ESG and CSR, yeah. So it's to go to those companies who have strong CSR programs, strong ESG programs, and also to tell your story, right? To tell a compelling story, to impel them to action. We talked about that a bit earlier. It's about telling a story that impels people to action. So tell it from your point of view. Tell it as a student who also went through the same thing. Talk about how you didn't maybe have all the resources that you wanted, right? That kind of builds a credibility because you are speaking as someone who's actually gone through it. And you're also speaking on behalf of other students. As a student yourself, you're speaking on behalf of other students who go through the exact same thing. So I would say it's building that credibility, that track record, that trust, and then looking for those companies, whether it's monetary donations or physical donations for things that you actually need, chairs, seats, a room, whatever it may be. So that's the advice I'd give you when it comes to fundraising. But thank you so much for all of your questions.
Thank you. I think there's a gentleman who's been trying to, yes. Okay.
Hello, Zurel.
Hi.
My name is Victor Odogu. So, one of the questions I've been asked already, but I would like to double down a bit on it. So, it was about your work in Nigeria because yes, you're African, but before that, you're actually Nigerian. So, I would like to understand because I noticed that in your experiences, I did not really hear a lot of works you have done here in Nigeria. So I would like to know and understand if you could help with mention a few things that you've done in Nigeria, I really appreciate that. And my next question is, will Zurel ever cross over from advocacy to governance? Meaning, in a more pointed manner, will you ever run for office? Thank you.
Those are interesting questions, yeah. So the first question, I actually started my education advocacy project here in Nigeria. The first school I spoke at was the School of Media and Communications. That's where all of this started. I've probably been to Nigeria about 18, 19 times for all of these projects. So I know we talk about more work in Nigeria. I do a lot here in Nigeria. I've done it here in Lagos State. I've done it in Abuja, Ogun State, Osun State, Port Harcourt. So I do this work in schools across the country. I've also run my filmmaking workshops here. Those same film workshops I've taught in Mexico, the US, Rwanda, and elsewhere, I've also taught them here a couple of times, actually. I've been to Lagos 2 or 3 times just for the film workshops alone. So I do a lot of work here. I just want to address that first question. And then the second part is you asked if I'd ever switch from advocacy to governance. Is that how you put it? I think, right? I think, honestly, I'd always be an advocate. Now, the position that I'm in where I'm able to advocate, maybe that will change wherever the Lord leads me. But I truly believe no matter what I'm doing, I will still always be an advocate for the things that I believe in. Thank you so much for your questions.
Which brings me, I think we still have some more questions, right? Okay, there's 1, 2, 3. I'm trying to see who else. 3 for now. Okay. So before we go to the gentleman in blue over there, I do have one question. There's something about youth and patience, and I'll explain. A lot of times, young people are often told to wait their turn. I think it's something we're used to here in Nigeria. It's just wait your turn, right? And then with that, we then have a lot of young people, because again, we're in a fast, everything moves quickly. A lot of the young people are like, no, we're not waiting our turn. We want to do things now. We want to change things now. Is there a world where we're able to have some sort of compromise, where there is the sense of urgency, because there's a lot that needs to be done. At the same time, there is also this thing of waiting our turn. Would you say that there is wisdom, or is it just a way of slowing the young people down? Or is there more wisdom in the urgency of young people of wanting to do things today and change the world today?
Well, I mean, I think you're right. There's definitely a compromise to it. I mean, as young people, we have a lot to learn from generations who came before us. And so there is wisdom in that, right? Because it's true. I know kids, we roll our eyes at it, but it's true. We don't know everything, right? And so there is things to learn. But at the same time, this generation, the generations who are coming after me, we're growing up in a world that's very different from the ones that our current leaders grew up in. We talked a bit about technology, how the world's like fast and evolving. So our world's completely different. So I think part of that sense of urgency is we look at it and we think we're, as youth, as the next generations, we're going to inherit whatever world gets left behind to us, whether it's good, whether it's bad. So part of that urgency is wanting to make sure that we inherit a world that has way more good than it does have bad in it. And so when it comes to like what the compromise is, I think it is very important to amplify the voices of youth. Now, I'm not saying every single leader has to be a youth, because there's a balance, right? You want the wisdom and the knowledge that comes from every generation in order to make decisions that best fit every constituent, because every constituent is not part of just one generation, right? Someone mentioned here in Nigeria is like 62% are youth. That's a major part, right? But it also means the other 58%, they're generations before us. So there's people on both sides. It's about finding that compromise to make sure that we're learning from the generations who come before us, we're including youth voices, and we're figuring out how to make it all work so that decisions are made to best benefit everybody, like the wide array of people there may be.
Thank you so much. I think there's a gentleman in blue who wanted to ask a question. Oh, there are two gentlemen in blue. Okay.
Okay, yeah, good
Okay,
afternoon.
let him go first.
Hi, Zurel. Very impressive profile. I love that. So, but question this is a very generic question. I don't know, but I wanted to answer in a very unique way with your very unique story. So, do you experience imposter syndrome, and how do you overcome it here? So now, why this question? You know, I'm a recent grad and quite few awards, best undergraduate projects in Lagos, but then I still battle with imposter syndrome. So please, very unique, like with your unique story and experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. I will be again, here goes back to the honesty. I know you're laughing. I'll be completely honest with you. That has actually never crossed my mind. And I think part of it is because in this journey, there's been a lot of relying on faith, a lot of prayer, and I've truly believed that the Lord's taken me somewhere. I have no idea where that may be, but I have the faith that the Lord has taken me somewhere. And so I continue to push myself, I continue on my projects. And so things like that have never crossed my mind. And that's just the truth. I know, because I know it happens a lot in our generation, because we look at it and we wonder, do we belong where we are today? And I guess what I'd say to that, because this was said to me when I first started my undergrad at UCLA, they told a lot of us students, first gen students, you may feel imposter syndrome coming into university, but know that where you are today is not by accident. It's not by mistake. All of your accomplishments are not by accident, and they're not a mistake. And so I don't know if this offers any solace to you at all, because I don't have any personal experience of that. But truly, like wherever you are today, here in this room, wherever you are, I know you mentioned you won a couple of awards at your school. None of them are by accident. And you truly, truly have a purpose. Just like how I have a purpose sitting here, how you have a purpose sitting right next to me, you also have a purpose. And so it's just to remember that and understand that, taking that wherever you go. Because if you truly understand that you are going somewhere, even if we don't know where it is yet, you are going somewhere, then hopefully that kind of helps address things like that. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
All right. Hi, Zurel. Good
Hi.
evening. Great work. Somehow people have been asking the questions I want to ask, but quickly, were there mistakes you made when you were starting off? And also, how did you recover from those mistakes? And also, if there's something you would tell your younger self, I know you're still young, but when you started off, if there was one lesson or one thing you would have told yourself then, what would it be?
That's a good. Did that cross off any more questions on your
Yeah,
list? It
just
did.
one more,
No, thank you very much for that question. Have there been any mistakes? That, as I'm sitting here, I'm trying to think. I know there's been a lot of lessons learned, not necessarily from mistakes, but just from seeing how there isn't, like I said, one way to do everything. And I think the biggest thing that I've learned from that is that I, as one person, as one voice, I have my own perspective, my own experiences. I can do the best I can of what I have, do the best I can on my journey, but that I am also just one person. Your second question was, if I were to speak to my younger self, because I'm younger, so my younger self, and tell them one thing, what would it be? I would tell them to start earlier. And that is
Earlier than nine? Okay.
Earlier than, because here's why. In all the work that I've done, I've literally seen how age is just a number and you're not too young to start. Now, when I started when I was 9, right? At that time, I wasn't thinking maybe I'm too young, maybe I'm just whatever. But now looking back, I'm like, I could have started when I was 8. I could have now 7, maybe that's pushing it just a little bit. But no, I could have started earlier. And so even just speaking to other youth, speaking to parents, like us youth, we can truly start at any age.
Yeah.
When I teach filmmaking workshops, when I speak to students in schools, I tell them you don't have to wait until you're older. If you want to do filmmaking, for example, you don't have to wait to get to film school. There's YouTube, there's Google, there's phones now. Our phones shoot better than a lot of major cameras do these days. Whatever it is that you want to do, there's always something you can do to start from now. So instead of saying, well, I want to be this 20 years down the line, maybe I'll go and like start that. You can't wait 20 years down the line. It starts from today. So the advice to my younger self, if I could tell them, and I'll tell any youth who asks me this, start younger, start as young as possible. But yeah, thank you so much for your question. It was actually a good one. I had to think about that for a little bit. But thank you very much for your question.
I think while we wait for the microphone to, I think there's a, to the next person, just, do you consider yourself an introvert or an extrovert?
I don't know. You've been sitting here with me for like 40 minutes. What do you think? What
No,
did you
because
think?
I know of introverts that are very good at speaking.
Oh, really?
So would you consider yourself an introvert or an extrovert? You
I couldn't tell you. I think no, because here's why. I've been doing this for so long, like naturally, public speaking, meeting with heads of state, doing all these kinds of things. So I don't know if that means I'm naturally extroverted or I was introverted who learned how to be extroverted. So I couldn't tell you. That's why I always ask other people, what do you think that I am? Because I have no idea.
okay. Says yes.
Hi, Zurel.
Hi.
Echoing the room, I think you have an exceptional resume. And my question is that today there are lots of conversations about how AI, inclusivity, etc. can change the world. But as a filmmaker, how do you think, what role do you think films can play in this narrative? Changing the world for the better. Yeah.
Oh, you mean, okay, so you meant AI can change the world. How can films change the world? I think films, and this is part of my continued filmmaking, I think films are a very powerful tool to get a message out to an incredibly wide audience. So imagine if you were to go and speak somewhere at a venue, right? And they filled the room with like 200 people and you tell your story. 200 people would have heard your message, but that's it. With filmmaking, and especially in this day and age of social media and all the trends and whatever, filmmaking can be used as a tool to amplify your messages to as many millions, honestly, millions of people around the world. And so I think it's so important, one, to amplify messages, but also I think it can be used as a tool to help empower. And I say that because I truly believe that filmmaking can be used to help those whose maybe voices aren't always heard, to help them amplify their voices and get their stories out. If we look at any of the big issues the world's facing, right? We talk about education, there's poverty, many other things. If you can imagine taking a film and telling the story and reaching as many people as possible, as opposed to just sitting in one room speaking to 100 people, 200 people, and hoping that that's enough to create impact. Not that 200 isn't enough, but being able to tell a story in a way where the whole world can see it, the whole world can understand it, that's how you begin to drive change, when other people can understand the challenges you're trying to present to them. Because I talked about how when I started education advocacy, right? It was because I saw it with my own eyes. If you open up a newspaper and read out of school kids, you might say, oh, that's really sad, yeah, right? But when you actually see it, when you actually hear their stories, that's what really touches people. And so I truly do believe that filmmaking does have a very, very crucial role to play in transforming how we see the world and also transforming how the world sees us. Thank you very much for your question.
Thank you. Do you have any more questions? I know we do. Just raise your hand. It's okay. Be audacious.
Hello. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
And hello, Zurel. Thank you for being phenomenal today in your story. It's been very inspirational. So my name is Cheta. I am someone who takes learning and inspiration very seriously. And so my question is very simple. Can you please share some of the most inspirational books that you have read that have helped you to remain inspiring, have helped you to continue this work that you're doing? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I'm just kind of like going through my Rolodex of books in my mind really quickly to figure it out. I think, and this is going to be an answer because it will incorporate not just the work that I do, but it can be translated to the work that anyone in this room does. A book that I often refer to, a book that I go back to a lot, is the Bible. I feel like, and you talked about like inspiration, leadership, and things like that. Truly, if you look at the Bible, there's like so much to be learned about how we're supposed to walk in our life, about how we're supposed to treat each other. And so I feel like that has definitely been something that I refer to, something that's inspired me and led me on this journey of education, advocacy, filmmaking, and whatever it is that may have come my way. Thank you for your question.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone.
Yeah, evening, afternoon, it's fine.
All right. My name is Shalakwe, and my question for you is, okay, first, thank you for being audacious. So you mentioned that you have had conversations on child marriage in Sudan, South Sudan, and Mozambique. So my question is, if you have ever started that conversation here in Nigeria, or in any way continue that conversation, because we still have child marriage being legal in parts of Nigeria today. Although I did see I think a report by UNICEF saying that it's a target for 2023 to eradicate it.
2023.
Sorry, 2030.
Oh, okay.
To eradicate it. So yeah, just have you ever had that conversation? Of course, not to put the responsibility on you, but just, yeah.
Thank you for your question. So most of my work in Nigeria has been mostly around trying to get girls into school. And I did talk about how part of that comes with addressing barriers including girl marriage. It is a practice that not only happens here, happens in many other countries. And so it is definitely something that's on my, like, it's a thing where anywhere I think I can add my voice and make a tangible difference, I want to do it. Mozambique was just one example. Like I said, it's a great success story, but that's one country out of like 54 on the African continent. And that's just the African continent. We're excluding other parts of the world. And so it's definitely a conversation or something that I do want to look at and address here in Nigeria and also in any other country, just because I said more than just the fact that, I mean, it's not a nice practice. More than that, it is something that genuinely, like when girls are taken out of school just to be sold into marriage and that's the end of it. Like I don't even know how you fathom, like, how do you know what I mean? Like, how do you fathom that? How do you think, how do you explain that? And so it is something that I want to focus a lot more on. And it's any opportunity I have to bring up those conversations or add my voice to that. Again, here in Nigeria and wherever else it may be, then that's something I look to do. Thank you so much for your question.
Okay, I'm back. But this is different. This time around, we've taken a lot from you. We've asked you a lot of questions. We've really drained you. So I'm going to flip it and say, what can we do for you? What can we do with you? There are a lot of people in this room who want to do more, probably can't figure it out the way you have, but if you recommended partnership for us in the private sector, what is it that anyone here in this room can do with you, for you, to enable you? Because sometimes when you find the right person for the job, it's best you put everyone behind that person instead of everyone trying to be a Zurel. I think, what can we do for you?
Thank you very much for that question. I think each and every one of you should definitely see me after this thing and ask me the exact same question. No, because I truly appreciate it. I mean, you're right. It's a team effort. it is about partnerships and collaboration. For the private sector is one thing. When it comes to individuals, and yes, you have like the fundraising for foundations, and there's those typical answers, right? Which are still true. Listen, fundraising is a big thing we do about foundations, so still true. But I think, and this is something, so you've asked me the question of what you all can do for me. I'm gonna ask you all to do something. Because he asked, what can you do for me? So I'm gonna ask you all to do something. Can you all do that for me? So half of the room said yes, they can. Can you guys do something for me? Once you leave here today, dream. But so not just you dream, but if you have children, there's people in your life that you know of, encourage them to dream as well. Dream big dreams, dream scary dreams. So not just things that are going to impact your own life or your families, or honestly, even your community. Dream dreams that will impact your country. Dream incredible dreams. And hopefully at the end of all that, we'll see your dreams also help change the world. See, I'm one person with one dream. If there's X amount of people in here with their own dreams, it's to dream those dreams, but act on them and do the best you can to accomplish them so that together we can make tangible steps in creating a sustainable difference in our world.
So I have a question. We've been asking you very, very, very serious questions, and not saying that, but I have a question. Being young and being audacious, and earlier on you told us that, you're just a girl. You play basketball and you spend time with your friends. What's it like having friendships, being audacious and different? Because I assume that some of your friends might not have traveled to as many countries as you have, or might not, have the same vision that you do, or have not recognized the calling in their lives the way you have so far, even though we know there's still so many years ahead of you. So what's it like having, in terms of friendships in general, and with all of this that you do?
And that's another question. I feel like I should have flown in a couple friends for you to ask them this. My friendships, no. Whenever I say normal, guys, I'm a completely normal girl. My friendships are whatever you imagine a friendship to be. That's what we do. For a lot of my friends, and this is a lot of my friends actually, they didn't find out about what I did until after like we were very, very good friends. And I don't mind that because you get to kind of understand how people are. You get to see how people treat you before they know about what you do. And so I very much appreciate that. And I think because of that, because we've already built good, strong foundations as friends, not knowing about all the other stuff that goes on, right? I think that's definitely helped because the friends I have, they're incredible. They're very supportive. They help me like hang out and chill when we're at home. But they know the work that I do. They're incredibly supportive of it, but they also don't treat me differently because of it. And that's something I very much appreciate. Because you meet people sometimes, they find out you do stuff, they treat you differently. I very much appreciate the friends that I do have don't treat me differently. I think that helps me to stay grounded. But also, it just, again, helps me stay that normal 22-year-old girl that I am.
Okay, just random question. Do you still do the dishes at home?
No. Do you know
No?
why?
Oh,
Because
wow.
my younger brother has risen up to the occasion. That got passed down. It started with me. It touched every sibling. Now it's my younger brother's chore.
Yeah, okay.
But I still help out. Not to sound like I'm slacking. I still help out around the house. I just don't do dishes anymore.
Okay. Any more questions? Yes, please.
Hi, Zuri. Sorry. So my name is Blessing. I'm in the real estate sector. But I want to ask this question. As a lady, a young lady for that matter, in the filmmaking industry, I want to ask do you get bullied? Do you get intimidated at any point? Do you get men that say, you're not meant to be here? Why are you doing exceptional work? You're going beyond your age, or you're moving too far. Some people automatically get intimidated by successful women, people that are doing way beyond their age or their look or their gender. So I want to know if you get that kind of bullish attack, or do you get comments thrown at you at a point in your life?
I know when I first started off, 9, 10, 11 years old, there were people who said comments like, you're just 10 years old. You're just 12 years old. You should be out playing with other kids your own age. What do you think you can do here? And this kind of goes back to, whilst that is not criticism, those kinds of comments I still choose to ignore. Because it's a thing, once you listen to them, they become distractions. Some of them, if you listen to them too much, they can end up becoming barriers, preventing you from getting to where you go. And then you ask, like, if I ever get intimidated, but absolutely not, because I know who my Father in heaven is. So I don't get intimidated by them. I'm still like very honored and very for each opportunity, but I don't get intimidated because I know who I am and whose I am, most importantly.
Yes.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Eki. Hi, Sheila.
Hello,
Hi,
Eki.
Zuri. Okay, first off, I will say I want to appreciate you for how you honor God in everything that you do. You've mentioned him so many times in the answers that you've given us, and I'm just so inspired by it. Um, and then I have a few questions. You know, some are on serious and some are serious. And I'm very happy that Blessing also went before me because one of my questions ties into what she asked. First question, what's the meaning of your name? I'm very curious. Second question, what's your favorite thing to eat? And third question, what would you say to men who are intimidated by women in power? And I'm asking this because I just recently, joined a corporate organization, got a job, and I was so excited, to join. And then we had a International Women's Day program, of course, this month, to celebrate that or, to keep the conversation going. And in one of the meetings that we had with some, external people, they commended what I did for that day, but they did not fail to remind me that most of the Fortune 500 companies we have were not even started by women. So why are you people making so much noise? Another man says, "Oh, well, even though they didn't start it, most of them are the ones managing it now, but they just make too much noise." And I'm like, what is this noise, that they're talking about? And someone else then says, what are you doing for men? Why are you not celebrating Men's Day? And in my mind, I'm like, that is not the conversation we're having. And it's because we are discussing this thing that we've started to try to promote women, It's because we're not talking about women in power that you are saying we are not starting those Fortune 500 companies. So we have to have these conversations, So my thing is, what do you say to those men who I believe it's fear? Maybe they're afraid of losing control or, being pushed aside. But I want to say intimidated. What do you say to men who are intimidated by women that have power? And what would you also say to younger girls who are coming after us and like advising them to, what's the word? Maneuver these comments? Because yes, I'm not a small girl, but those comments go to me because why you calling it noise? Do you get what I mean? So yes, those are my questions. I'll repeat them again. First one, meaning
My
of your
name.
name.
Yep.
Second one, favorite thing to eat. And then the third one, what would you say to men who are intimidated by women in power? And what would you advise the younger girls coming in, how they can navigate that kind of thing? Thank you.
Thank you very much for all your questions. So I guess let's go easy to more complex. The meaning of my name, Zuriel, it's Hebrew actually. It means God is my rock. So all of my siblings, we have Hebrew names of strong biblical meanings. My parents wanted to give us names because they believe there's power in names, power in words. And so whenever they call our name, they want to be speaking that thing over our life. So for me, Zuriel means God is my rock. For food, I'm a big foodie, so I actually don't have a favorite food. Here in Nigeria, I might go for like pounded yam and egusi or jollof and beef stew or something, something like that. But like generic food, I eat almost anything. I say almost because there's certain creatures I don't want to be trying, but I would eat almost anything. And then the third question is what I would say. I talked about it a bit earlier. It's this thing where if you think about over the last 40, 50, 60 years, a lot of the world's biggest challenges are still the world's biggest challenges: poverty, hunger, healthcare, right? And so part of that has been because when we don't include the whole world, right? It's like we're using only half of our brain. if we have 100% of this world and only 50% are the ones being engaged, being asked for advice, asked for solutions, it's like if we're only using half our brain to solve a problem. It's like trying to fix something with one hand or one arm tied behind our back. So that's what I would say. If we want to see significant change, we have to include everybody, because what's been happening for the last 50, 60 years clearly hasn't been working. To the young girls, and honestly, us, like the older generations, we have a role to play to make sure we lay the foundation and set the stage so that way future generations don't have to go for the same things. But for any who may, my thing would be, it goes back to not to listen to those kinds of comments. See, there's hearing and there's listen. No, yes. Yes, there's hearing and there's listening, right? Hearing is a sense, right? Taste, touch, sense, hearing is a sense. Stuff can go in, but let it go right back out. So there's a difference between hearing and listening. Those kind of comments, you may hear it. It'll be hard not to hear it, but you can't listen to them. And this last thing I'll throw in for free. My personal advice to you: next time someone in your company tells you, oh, the Fortune 500 companies or X amount were started by men, remind them, yes, but they were all birthed by a woman.
Any more questions? Yes, okay.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, you have a incredible, inspiring story. I just went online to just check a snapshot of some of the
no pressure
things you've done. And I know it's not been a walk in the park. I want to ask just one question. What has been your most challenging moment in your journey, and how have you been able to overcome this? Because I know a lot of people have dreams. Some abandon their dreams and run away. Some are too scared to pursue. Some are not even inspired. So what is the most inspiring part of your journey? How did you overcome these challenges that you have faced during the course of your journey? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. So if I understand, there's two. You said, what's the most inspiring part of my journey? And then what's been the biggest challenge and how I overcame it? Let's see. Start with most inspiring part of my journey. I think honestly is any time I'm able to interact with students from any country, anytime I'm able to hear their stories, and also to see the difference or the impact that talking about dreams, that talking about the importance of using your voice has had on them. There was, and this is like I'll do a couple examples. Much earlier example, I talked about filmmaking workshop in Namibia. I've talked about the Mozambique success story. There's another story. A few years ago, I went to Malawi to speak at an orphanage there. And I went to go speak to the students there. And the whole time I was there, the kids were quiet. So you would not have thought that I made any kind of impact at all. But I went there, I spoke to them about dreams, spoke to them about speaking up, shared the work that I did with them. And then after that, I left, went back home. It was a few weeks later, the head teacher from that orphanage, she reached out to me and she said that because of how well all the students were doing in school, they took all the kids out to a concert as a reward for good grades. And while they were at that concert, one of the young girls, she was there the day that I spoke. She also went to the concert. She raised her hand and she asked her head teacher if she could go meet and interview the head performer at that concert. And the teacher was surprised. She was shocked because they don't usually do that. They're very quiet. And she asked her go, she said, why all of a sudden do you want to go and speak to the head performer of this concert? And she said, because when that 10-year-old girl came, she was younger than I was, but she was meeting with presidents and talking about this and talking about that. I thought the least that I could do was maybe go and speak to the head performer and interview them and do that sort of thing. And so it's stories like that that continue to inspire me. One, because it shows the little impact that my work has. I was talking about this a bit earlier. I can't remember with who I was speaking about it with, but they asked me similar question about what inspires you to keep going. And I mentioned the youth, but then I also said that in complete honesty, in every country that I go to do this work, if I just have an impact on one person's life, then it would have been worth it. I've spoken to like 51,000 plus, however many may be, but just one person in each of those countries, then it's worth it. And that's enough for me. So hearing those stories truly inspires me to continue on this journey. And then the other question that you asked me was about biggest challenge I faced, how I overcame it. I think this is a tough one. And because I know I've talked about a few challenges, so I'm trying to think of a new one. I mentioned the South Sudan challenge. I think, let me see, another challenge might be, and this may come, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a challenge, maybe more, we'll see how we frame it, but when you're talking about the impatience of youth, I'm a youth, in case y'all haven't noticed. Sometimes I want to see change immediately. And so with some of the heads that I go and I speak to, I want to see like change immediately, right? I've learned from that there has to be a lot of patience. Things don't happen overnight. But I've also learned, like I've grown with it and understanding that I see that there are steps that can be taken. And so whether it's like the South Sudan example or any other example where I want to see immediate change and I haven't seen it, instead of just saying, that's a barrier, this is a roadblock, this is a challenge, et cetera, it's to say, okay, if that one approach didn't work, let me step back. Is there a smaller step I can take? Is there something else I can do? Is there another way to approach this to try and figure out how to solve that problem? So I think that's probably something I've learned through facing challenges and then answering the first question as well. I hope those answered both of your questions. You did it perfect. Okay. Thank you so much for your questions. I appreciate that.
Is there any more questions? I think we have exhausted the room. Yes? No more questions. Okay. And thank you so much for, because that is a lot of questions that you've had to answer. As we wrap up for the night, for the evening, I have just two final questions. Right.
I like that. Just not one,
Just
two.
Just two.
Two. Okay.
Just two. And I'll say the first one is also like following from, the young lady's question over there. So being audacious and bold action comes with consequences sometimes. Sometimes. Not in all cases, but sometimes. Would you say that you've ever been in a position where it felt like you had to choose with, do I say something? Do I address this? Or do I just sort of leave this for now and come back to it later?
See, now you're making me think of that question. I do not think so. I think, just how our parents raise us, like if you think you see something you can make a difference, and you should. Even my education project, Dream Up, Speak Up, Stand Up, the whole point of it was to teach kids or talk to kids about not just dreaming, but speaking up for what you believe in and standing up for others who can't stand for themselves. Now you say, is there ever been a time where I've chosen to not say anything? Maybe I've changed how I would have said something, made it a bit nicer, a bit more polite, but I don't think there's been any instance where I have chosen not to speak up or not to raise my hand.
Okay. And then the last question.
Let's make it a fun one.
Yes.
Let's make it a fun one. Okay, go ahead.
What would you say is your greatest dream at the moment?
Greatest dream at the moment. I think, it has to go and align with the work that I do. Greatest dream at the moment is to see a world where every child has access not just to education, but good quality education. And a world where we value youth voices, we include them in conversations, and also in a world where we learn to see the value of women. Men have a role to play, but women can also do amazing, incredible things for our world and our society. It's just to make sure that we include them. So I think those probably be the three biggest things that I hope to see. Soon, hopefully soon, hopefully really soon.
Hopefully. Thank you so much. I
Thank
believe
you.
tonight has been an incredible, I would say it's been, please, a round of applause if we can.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And I know that this is going to be one of those sessions where you will go back on YouTube and watch over and over and then take notes. I've been taking so many notes. I still have some notes on my phone and I'm like, oh God, I need to take out time to study this. I would say again, thank you so much. Your life is an inspiration, and we know that for many years to come, it would continue to be an inspiration.
By the grace of God.
One thing that for me that stands out is your faith, and it's something that, especially in this day and age, a lot of young people, sometimes it's not so cool. And then just seeing you just saying, look, everything I am today is by the grace of God.
Absolutely.
And so for that, I would say thank you for flying that flag. At the same time, thank you for continuing to advocate for girls around the world. I know that some people here are hoping that, we hope to see you advocate more for girls in Nigeria, because I've been getting a few of the questions like, so what about us? What about us? Yeah. But at the same time, as you continue to be an inspiration, with so many young girls and even older women just looking at you and are now becoming more audacious. I know most of us are going to live here today saying, you know what, I am going to do it. That dream that I have, say that if you're something you said earlier, I was like, if your dream doesn't
Don't
scare you,
it's not
big enough.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that when it comes to being audacious, when it comes to being a fearless generation, is having those dreams that scare us and being able to do something about those dreams. So again, thank you so much, Zurel.
Thank you.
And how do we this is the age of social media, so
absolutely.
what are the different handles that we can follow you on?
So yeah, of course. So on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, it's just my first and last name, Zuriel Oduwole. And then Instagram is the only one where it's Zuriel.Oduwole. But I'm pretty sure if you typed in Zurel Odu, there'd probably be only one, maybe two, but I'm pretty sure just one. But yeah, so those are the best ways to keep up with what I'm doing and to get in contact.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And on that note, I would like to welcome the CEO of, well, are we taking pictures now or later? Yes? Sorry, Ife Olua, I was informed that, are we taking pictures now or later? Now? Later, I was looking for you, sorry. Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. I'm sure we've all been inspired by Zurel's incredible story. I know I've been inspired. Thank you so much for sharing, Zurel. The theme for SLS, the edition of SLS, is the audacity to do. And I'm sure we've all beaten the bug to be truly audacious in all that we do, in the deals we sign, the partnerships we forge. Yeah, thank you very much, Zurel, for sharing your incredible story. On a lighter note, I heard you mention you like pounded yam. So do you take it with Eforiro?
Egusi.
Oh, egusi. Egusi. Wow, awesome. But I think you should try amala, right? Or ofada. I must warn you though, it's a bit spicy. But
I
yeah,
like
you should
spicy.
try.
That's
You
fine.
like spice?
Yeah, I do.
Then we should set you up with ofada rice.
There you go. That's dinner.
So I'll just quickly invite a couple of our senior stakeholders to the podium to take pictures. We'll be doing it in batches. I would like to invite the CEO, Sterling Bank Abu.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
The CEO, Sterling One Foundation, Olakwicho Ibekwe. and the CMO, Sterling Bank, Morris. Are you done? No, take this batch, in batches. Apologies, I would quickly like to invite Charles O'Mara. See you, Sterling FI. Yeah. I would like to invite all our stakeholders at the front seats. All our execs at the front seat. The CHRO, all our stakeholders at the front seat.
Oh, they're all there.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. I would just like to quickly mention that the conversation continues tomorrow at the University of Lagos at Madhouse. So bring your younger ones just so that they can be inspired by Zurel. Thank you very much.
No, I think we're good. Okay, thank you so much for joining us in this production to take pictures. And on that note, we would like to welcome the CEO, Mr. Abubakar Suleiman, for the closing remarks.
Well, the remark is about Zurel, so if you don't mind, just a minute more on the stage. Look, I know that you're here today because of the work you've done, and we're hoping that by sharing your journey with us, those of us that didn't start as early as you did can still start. I don't think it's ever late to start. But more importantly, I think the younger people who are out there, my daughter, I have a 20-year-old, I have a 9-year-old, I hope they're listening. I hope they will listen. I hope that all the young girls out there who never imagined that this was possible, what you've demonstrated is that they can do that. I know we reached out to you and you said yes. You didn't even hesitate at all. I'd assume that there will be some long conversation. I'll talk to some agents and stuff. I spoke to your dad and you said yes, you would do it, and you did it. So it doesn't end today. It's just starting. I'm hoping that more and more people will get the opportunity to listen to you. And as they listen to you, they'll look inside themselves and they will find something that's always been there that they've never realized was there. But they would also find support, because their parents who have listened today will know that it's okay for a 9-year-old to ask to speak to Jerry Rawlings and to demand to interview him, and from there to go on and on and on. So I think those of us as parents, we now understand that when young people, when our children come to us and they want to do things that sound crazy, for as long as the objective is clear, we will support them. And for everyone else who made it here tonight, you're the star as well, because there's no point in Zurel was here talking to herself, then it's of no use, right? You're here, and because you're here, you will do something, right? We can have all the audacity, but if we don't do something, then we haven't done anything. So thank you very much. Thank you, and I'm really glad that you made it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and do have a fantastic evening. I've also been informed to inform you that there are cocktails outside, so we can go out there for networking. And the conversation continues tomorrow at Unilag Madhouse at 3 p.m. Come with your young adults.